It's the question that captivated millions around the globe. Could a nightmare like Squid Game actually be based on a true story? The answer is a simple no, but the truth is infinitely more complex, and in many ways, more disturbing. Because while the games themselves are fiction, the desperation that fueled them is not. It's rooted in a real-life event, an event so violent it directly inspired the tragic backstory of the show's own hero. Before we uncover the specific event that shattered Song Gi-hun's life, we have to understand the one thing that connects all 456 players: a down-on-his-luck gambler, a so-called hometown genius, wanted for fraud, a migrant worker cheated by his employer, a North Korean defector fighting for her family. On the surface, they have nothing in common, except for one crushing, inescapable reality: debt. It is the engine that drives the entire show. A level of financial desperation so profound that a deadly contest seems like a reasonable way out. But is this just a clever plot device for a fictional story? Or is it a horrifying reflection of real life? To understand the real inspiration for Squid Game, you first have to understand the intense economic pressure cooker of modern South Korea. For years, the country has been grappling with a household debt crisis on a staggering scale. South Korea's household debt to GDP ratio is one of the highest in the developed world. To put that simply, the money owed by its private citizens is greater than the value of all goods and services the entire country produces in a year. This isn't just about a few bad decisions. It's a systemic problem fueled by soaring housing prices and a hyper-competitive culture where taking on massive debt for education and status is often seen as the only path forward. This real-world desperation creates the perfect fertile ground for a story like Squid Game. It establishes the why, and it was within this exact pressure cooker that one company's decision lit a fuse that would become the blueprint for Song Gi-hun's entire life. In the first episode of Squid Game, we see Song Gi-hun haunted by a single traumatic memory, a violent strike and a colleague he couldn't save. This isn't just a fictional device to make us sympathize with him. This flashback is a direct, undeniable reference to one of the most brutal labor disputes in modern Korean history. Before the trauma, there was stability. For decades, a job at the Ssangyong motor company was a ticket to the middle class. It meant security, a pension, the ability to buy a home and raise a family. For thousands of workers, it wasn't just a job, it was a job for life. But in the wake of the 2008 global financial crisis, everything changed. In April 2009, under new management, the company delivered a bombshell. More than 2,600 workers, over a third of the entire workforce, were to be laid off. For the workers, this wasn't just a layoff, it was a death sentence for their livelihoods. Their response was desperate and absolute. Nearly 1,000 of them occupied the factory's paint shop, a building filled with highly flammable thinners and solvents, vowing not to leave until their jobs were secured. The occupation began, and for the next 77 days the factory became a war zone. Police surrounded the compound, cutting off access to food, water and medicine. The workers inside were trapped. They survived on scraps using giant slingshots made from vehicle parts to fire bolts at riot police, while authorities retaliated with water cannons laced with tear gas solution. As the siege dragged on, the clashes grew more violent. The government, determined to break the strike, approved a final brutal assault. On August 6th, after 77 days of hell, the strike was broken. The workers emerged battered and defeated. But for these men, the end of the strike was just the beginning of their suffering. They were hit with crippling lawsuits from the company demanding millions in damages. They were blacklisted, making it impossible to find work elsewhere. The psychological toll was catastrophic. In the years that followed, an estimated 30 workers and their family members died from PTSD, depression and suicide, a trauma that echoed through an entire community. This is the trauma that created Song Gi-hun. The real inspiration for his character isn't just a man who is bad with money. It's a man who was systematically broken, who witnessed the death of his friends and was discarded by a society that no longer had a use for him. His story is a direct reflection of this real-life tragedy. And while the Ssangyong strike is the most direct inspiration for Squid Game's hero, it's not the only dark chapter of Korean history hidden within the show's deceptively simple games. The strike explains the man, but what explains the system? The games themselves are built on the foundation of total dehumanization. Where does this chilling imagery come from? For many South Koreans, it echoes another real-life horror, a national trauma that for decades was buried in silence: the Brothers' Home. On paper, it was a state-sponsored welfare centre established in the 1970s to purify the streets by housing the homeless, the disabled, and orphans, but the reality was a concentration camp. For over a decade, thousands of innocent people were abducted by police and subjected to forced labor, torture, and horrific abuse. Hundreds are believed to have died, their bodies buried in unmarked graves. While the show's creator has never officially confirmed a direct link, the parallels are undeniable to survivors and historians. The loss of names to numbers, the identical uniforms erasing individuality, and a brutal system where human lives were treated as disposable. The dark truth of the brothers' home adds another haunting layer to the Squid Game inspiration. This deep-seated critique of societal systems comes from a place of personal experience. Creator Hwang Dong-hyuk first wrote the script back in 2009, the very same year as the Ssangyong strike. At the time, he was living through his own financial struggles, but when he pitched his idea, studios rejected it for over a decade, calling it too grotesque, too complex, and unrealistic. The irony, of course, is that the world just hadn't become desperate enough yet to see how real it truly was. Of course, Squid Game didn't emerge from a vacuum. It owes a clear debt to the Japanese death game genre, popularized by stories like Battle Royale and Gi-hun. But what made Hwang's creation so unique was its use of simple, nostalgic children's games as the arena for brutality, and its laser focus on a distinctly Korean social problem: debt. So when you piece it all together, you see the full picture. The real story behind Squid Game isn't one single event, it's a powerful mosaic, combining the pressure cooker of a national debt crisis, the raw trauma of a violent labor dispute, the historical echoes of a forgotten tragedy, and the DNA of a popular creative genre. So, we come back to our original question, the one that started this entire investigation. Is Squid Game based on a true story? The simple answer is no. There was no secret island, no cabal of masked VIPs orchestrating a tournament of death. But the real story of what inspired Squid Game is far more potent. It's not a recreation of a single event. Instead, it's a brilliant and brutal allegory, a fictional nightmare built on the very real foundations of economic despair, the raw, violent trauma of labor strife, and the dark historical memories that continue to haunt South Korea. The series became a global phenomenon not just because of its violence, but because its central theme is universally understood. It holds a mirror up to a world grappling with social inequality, where the distance between the impossibly rich and the desperately poor feels more like an uncrossable chasm. And that reveals the show's ultimate, most terrifying truth. The horror of Squid Game isn't the games themselves. It's the terrifying realization that the real world can become so broken, so desperate, that a choice like that could almost begin to make sense. Thank you so much for joining me on that deep dive. If this documentary gave you a new perspective on Squid Game, the best way to support the channel is to hit that like button and to subscribe for more deep dives into the real stories behind the shows we love.